We'll see how this goes. This is a new experience. You're now the third or fourth person I've brought in Michael Knowles into the Clubhouse folds to hopefully not get too folded up, but to participate in a type of live dialogue that may be limited to the next, very short period of time before it gets canceled or we get canceled. I know I'm cancellation adjacent when I have you on, but it's none
You
other
certainly are.
than Michael Knowles, who is joining us live. Your image is frozen, but I think I can hear you still. Are you still there?
I'm frozen. How do I fix that? I lost my
Let me.
producer. He went home.
Oh
Let
no!
me see.
It's only 3 or 4 o'clock where you are, right?
I know, it's outrageous. We don't work around here at the Daily
Slacking
Wire.
off.
Ever since we got Gina Carano on, we just watch movies all day.
Just popcorn and Mandalorian repeats. Wow, that is the life. So folks on Clubhouse are piling in. We got a good crowd already. But yeah, I cannot see Michael. That is weird. That is weird.
Here, I'll text my producer.
All right, let's see if that would work. Let's see. I'm
Please.
gonna go home here, and I'll see about going live. We are on YouTube as well, and we are joined by some friends on YouTube and Clubhouse. So this is great. Hopefully, Michael will get his technical difficulties settled down. He, of
I'm just gonna
course,
throw
is
the
the.
screen at the wall. That's usually how that's how
I
I
just
hit the TV when I was a kid.
just pour your coffee all over the
Yeah.
keyboard. That'll clean it up. So we're talking with the expert scientist, as folks may know from our conversation on Prager University's book club. The word scientist or science in Latin means knowledge, and it doesn't mean wisdom, right, Michael? So we had a nice conversation about that on the PragerU book club episode came out about a month or two ago, and I figured I'd have you back. I'd have you on my show. Because you have to rebut all those things that Ben Shapiro said about you when he was on the Into the Impossible podcast. He didn't do Clubhouse. He refuses to do Clubhouse for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why.
I know I've been trying to get some of my friends to join Clubhouse, but then I never really do anything with it. I'm not an early adopter, which is why I have to tell you I was very hesitant to do Galileo on the book show. I wanted to have you on because that seemed very exciting, but I still haven't quite come around to Galileo. I'm a little bit more in the Pope's camp, obviously, but you did a good job. You did a good
That's
job
right.
persuading me.
Yes, and
But if I can't get on with Galileo, clearly new technology is going to take a little while to get accustomed to.
that's right. Although we both believe that the universe is centered on us, so one of us is probably right, but
That's
I won't
right.
I
That's right.
won't say who. So you're still frozen, but we can still be heard on in the clubhouse and on YouTube. So you will be forever frozen. And unfortunately, you were like picking something out of your nose. I think when the image
Oh, good.
froze.
Yeah, that's a perfect image to have here. Hold on, I'm going to
I
text
think
more people and then start screaming because I think there's this misconception on my show. I seem sort of nice, but I'm not. I'm a vicious man, and I physically abuse my staff. So let me get them on the line here.
Oh my! That was just following in the footsteps of your hero and mine, Galileo Galilei. So those of you in Clubhouse, we're going to hopefully have a conversation that you will not lack for on Clubhouse because it's audio only on Clubhouse until they figure out a way to add video to Clubhouse. But we're talking with Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire, of The Verdict, of Reasons to Vote for Democrats, a comprehensive guide, which I'm holding up a signed copy thereof. And I've read this book cover to cover now about 6 or 7 times, Michael. It is such a breeze. It is so beautifully argued and written. I just commend you on that. And we are all very much looking forward to your next book, Speechless, which will hopefully contain some words. And I cannot wait for those words to come together because we are waiting to hear from that. And speech is what we are known for. And I think Clubhouse is a great medium for you, as it would be even for your colleague and friend, Ben Shapiro. And hopefully, I've pointed out to some people, I'm friends as you are with Eric Weinstein. You hosted him on The Verdict. You
Yep.
called it something like a progressive, speaks or something like that. It was good because Eric's very shy and he doesn't like to speak very much. But but in that conversation, or in a recent conversation with Eric, who got me onto Clubhouse, I pointed out to him that he has something like 2.5. You're there again. All right, let's see if you can join again. Let's see here. Now I see you. All right. All right, let me join. Let me add you to the right. How about this? Can you move? Can you blink? Oh, you're blinking. I see proof of life. All right, but you can't. Can you not hear me? Oh, you can. Now I don't hear you, but I see you. So now I see you, but I don't hear you. Say something again, Michael. No, I don't hear you. I don't hear you. I see you. You're moving now, but I don't. I know. No, can hear you. Let me see. Let me see here. See you. Can you say something? But don't hear you. So that is strange. Let's see here. I don't think it's on my end. Do you say? Can you count? Give me a count. A 1, 2, 3. So you hear me, yes? But you don't. You don't. I can't hear you. That is weird. That is weird stuff. Maybe a third time would be the charm. Maybe we should eject Michael from here. And the mute's not on. You don't have mute on or anything, Michael. I show you at maximum volume, but I do not hear anything. Sorry for the technical difficulties out there on Clubhouse, and I'm sure we're going to get this figured out in no time at all. This is high technology. Michael is in a studio / man cave somewhere in Tennessee, somewhere where Tennessean is Tennessee. But now he's frozen, and I don't hear him. Wow, this is getting much more. Soon I won't be able to hear myself, and that would be quite a disaster. We're going to talk with Michael Knowles about science, about politics, about what it means when folks say to listen to scientists, what that actually implies, and whether or not one can have sort of almost religious faith in science. Here we go. Let's see if he's there. Okay, Michael, let me add you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear
You're
you, and I can
Hey,
see
all
you.
right.
All right.
See,
Well, that's all the
Ryan,
time we have, everybody. That's all the time we have.
thank you for having me. It's good to be here. I want this to be the case in point. By the way, thank you to my producer who just came in.
Yeah.
Uh, I want this to be the case in point. This is why I'm so skeptical of basically anything that was said or done after about 1352. That to me, that was
That was peak technology.
That was peak technology. It was peak arts and culture, and as our society decays, so too we like the wonders of these new apps. But
Did you move?
look how they work. Look
Did
how
you
they
move to
impede
Mennonite country?
communication.
I thought you moved to Memphis, not Mennonite country.
Tomato, tomato.
Well, it's great to see you. It's great to be back with you. We were together back in September, I guess it was, and we did a wonderful episode of the Prager University Book Club, which you are the host and the really the proprietor of that fine book club, which features all sorts of things. But I was the first one to ever give a science overview, and so I take great pride in that because normally what you hear, Michael, is that people like you, and I'm told you're more right-leaning than left-leaning. I'm told that the Democratic Party, of which your book was written, Reasons to Vote Democrat, a comprehensive guide, I'm told they're the party of science. Is there such a thing as the party of science, or does science belong to all people and all parties?
Well, you would hope that science belongs to all people who want to pursue truth. It's sort of ironic that now a party which at various times denies objective truth would call themselves the party of science. But of course, they take on this label, and I think there's a reason for it, which is that they have embraced secular liberalism or scientism or any of these other isms as a sort of replacement faith. And this is a faith that they want to have serve as the fundament of our new modern society. And the idea here is that people in the old bad timey days were not only bigoted and racist and sexist and all sorts of evil, but they were also extremely stupid. And so there's no reason to take seriously any of the things that they believe or to respect any of the institutions and cultures that they developed. Who needs St. Thomas Aquinas, that big dum-dum, when you've got some random blue-haired atheist liberal walking the street today? They have all of the answers, and they have an iPhone. If they don't happen to know something off the top of their head, they can always look it up. Yay, science. And as you and I know very well, humility is the beginning of wisdom. And I think that it's no surprise today that this kind of popular liturgy of secular liberalism embraces as its highest virtue pride. Not even the pride of the pride parades of the 1970s, very narrowly limited to sexual questions, but pride as the tantamount virtue, which is, once considered the queen of all vices, and now would seem to be the virtue that we all exalt, and it's made us all very dumb as we all fashion ourselves scientists.
When I think about science lately, I've been thinking about two different things. One, that we're told to listen to scientists, and I want to get your take on this, because I think a lot of times the word listen is really implying obey. It's not necessary only to listen to scientists, as you and I talked about in the PragerU book club event that we did together. Was Aristotle was a scientist. He was the first person, as you know, Michael, to discover that whales were not fish. And I know you use that quite frequently there in Tennessee. I know it's a big deal for you. But he also came with the laws of logic, and he also felt there were four elements, and that heavier things fell faster than lighter ones, etc. And so, do you obey him? Do you not obey him? Do you listen to him? You look at Otto. Or shall we say, let's see, what was the other example I've come up with recently? Oh yeah, Haber. Fritz Haber was a scientist, and he was an expert. He came up with the process that made fertilizer that allowed you to eat breakfast this morning, and half the world's food production is based on the Haber process that produces nitrogen-based fertilizers. He was a great scientist. And then in 1915, he was conscripted by the Kaiser's army to create a shock chemical weapons group, an actual troop within the German army. And he not only participated in making the first effective chemical warfare based on chlorine gas, but he also volunteered and got 3 other Nobel Prize winners along with him. So you had 4 Nobel Prize winners volunteering to go into the trenches literally and spray chemical weapons on people, and never regretted it. He never expressed any remorse for it. Even after his wife committed suicide, one of his children committed suicide over their guilt, he never expressed guilt. And later, by the way, tragically, in some sense, his own relatives, he was of course a German Jew, his own relatives were put to death by a chemical by the name of Zyklon B, which was produced by Haber's factory. So should we listen to him? I mean, so where do we go? Where do we listen to scientists? What does it mean, in your opinion? What are scientists good for? Keeping in mind you are an expert scientist.
Well, I am an expert scientist because I try to know things, and so I therefore satisfy the conditions of expertise and of science. I think your example shows the point very, very well. We're often told that we need to follow the scientists because science works. And the chemical warfare that you've described, which was developed through scientific processes, it did work. The question is, what did it work to do? When we hear that we need to follow these technocrats in lab coats who want to govern our country for us, even though none of us seem to have ever elected these people, we're told, well, they just know what works. Dr. Fauci, probably he's honestly ignorant. I don't think he's necessarily being deceptive here. He says that I've never publicly stated a political position in my life, but you'd have to have a very paltry understanding of politics to make such a statement. Dr. Fauci is a professional politician. His job is public health. So half of that is a scientific field, the health side, and half of that is a political field, the public side. Public and politics mean the same thing. So Dr. Fauci's recommendations certainly do work. I know it's a little confusing because he seems to change those recommendations every single day, but his recommendations work to achieve certain ends. If we lock ourselves up in our homes for eternity and never leave and telecommute and don't see any of our friends and family, I strongly suspect that that would work to reduce the transmission of, say, the common cold or the flu or the sniffles or something like that. But it would not work to give us a flourishing society. It would actually cut against having a flourishing society because there are priorities. What works, you have to know what you want to do. And unfortunately, the left in this country and a huge portion of the right are not willing to acknowledge that secular liberalism is not a valueless default position. It is a value-laden political position that has certain premises and is ordered towards certain things. But they're not willing to admit that. So, you know what, to give the devils their due, at least on the woke left, you've got these new radicals saying, this is our vision of society, this is what we want, this is what we don't want, this is what we think is good, this is what we think is bad, and we're going to use any means necessary to affect that. Whereas on the right, all too often what people say is, you do you, you do whatever you want. I'm not willing to offer a substantive moral vision or a political vision. And of course, what that has led to is this kind of technocratic uh, liberal society that pretends that it doesn't have any values when it's probably got the most radical values of any regime we've seen in modern history.
When I think about, how a scientist can be perceived by different segments of the population, on one hand, it's sort of appreciated almost as a godlike status that, as Arthur C. Clarke, who is the namesake of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination, which I co-direct here at UC San Diego, he said any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And then, as Michael Shermer has said, any sufficiently advanced, tech magic is indistinguishable from God, something to that effect. And it is really true that science has almost these godlike powers. We can extend life, we can take life, we can modify life, we can understand the depths of the atom and unleash unrivaled energy storage mechanisms. We can explore other worlds, and really, it does come with this power that I'm kind of curious to get your take on it, because we and I haven't talked about this. What is the role? Is there a tension between the bipartite goals of an all-powerful, all-knowing God who has benevolence? Is this sort of a gift to mankind that can be rescinded, like I do with my children, and you will soon do with your young man that you welcomed into the world so lovingly a few months ago? Are these just gifts? Are they temporarily on loan? Are they permanent? And once you give it, unlike toothpaste, when I order it from Amazon, you can never return it. How does it work in your mind? Does God give us this gift with the expectation that we'll do the right thing with it, or what?
When you say gift, are you referring to free will, or are you referring to higher faculties of reason?
I'm talking about the faculties of reason that enable mankind to take on godlike powers in a
Yeah.
certain sense of modifying life, not necessarily ab initio and ex nihilo, but yes, these reasoning powers that lead to science, and as many of my colleagues and I seem to believe is this most powerful force that must be wielded with great almost temerity and great fear in a sense. So yeah, so
Yeah, it is certainly a gift, and it's a gift that God will not rescind. God is not going to take away your reason, but you can squander your reason. You can do that very well. We do have free will to squander the gifts we're given, and so you have to cultivate them first of all in the right way. And it's a great responsibility, because it seems to me that the greatest saints of history could have been the worst sinners of history, and vice versa. Their powers are so great. And this is the purpose of liberal education, that we seem to have forgotten it, which is that you are educated from a very young age, when your mind is much more malleable, to tame your base passions and to develop your higher faculties and your higher virtues. And because vice and virtue are habits, the more you do them, the more you're going to do them. It's why I think there's a heavy debate right now, especially on the right, over what the nature of liberty is. You have some sort of left-wing libertarians, and even some right-wing libertarians, who believe that liberty is just the ability to do whatever you want to do. If you want to eat all the cookies in the cookie jar, if you want to pursue your appetites to no end, you can do that. Whereas the classical view of liberty, certainly the Christian view of liberty, but the even pre-Christian understanding of liberty, and crucially the understanding of liberty that our founding fathers had, is quite different. That liberty was summed up by Lord Acton, who is a well-venerated figure by many libertarians, though perhaps they haven't read this portion, which is that liberty is not the ability to do whatever you want, but the right to do what you ought to do. You can use a simple example. Consider a heroin addict. By the kind of modern, shallow definition of liberty, a heroin addict is the freest guy in the whole world. He can just pursue his appetites as long as he's got a couple bucks in his pocket, and what freedom is that? But we all know the heroin addict isn't free. He's the greatest slave around. He cannot tame his appetites.
Why'd you
He
have to bring
has
up heroin, Michael? Why?
I know, starting to get the itch, are you?
That's
It's
right.
this sort of thing means that you don't have any control over your will, and you haven't cultivated those faculties of reason. So this is what really really worries me, when the left, the radical left, goes in not just to high schools or colleges, but all the way into elementary schools, and radically transforms education away from that which would be edifying toward that which is shallow and ideological and ultimately destructive. Is the problem is, that's going to have a lifelong effect. And if you do that to enough people, there goes your society.
Yeah. Just remind people we are talking with Michael Knowles, the proprietor of the Michael Knowles podcast, Michael Knowles Show, which you can get, as I do, on any podcatcher. Michael, your video's frozen again. I wonder if you
Video.
can.
I'm going to go scream at my producer again.
Yeah, well, yeah, hit him with the
I
book.
haven't developed my higher faculties of virtue here, so I'm just going to scream.
Hit him with the heroin spoon that I left over at your place last time.
Yeah.
So Michael has several book projects. Well, he's got one major book in the works and one that was a bestseller with over 5,000 reviews on Amazon, 5-star and above. I don't know how he did that. And that's called Reasons to Vote for Democrats, a comprehensive guide. My copy is signed. No, you may not have it. And I don't want to give it away. I hate when podcast hosts have me on as a guest and say, "Well, tell me your entire book and its thesis," and so that my listeners don't have to buy it. No, I will not do that. But I will put in a encomium for this book and also for his upcoming book, Speechless, which could not be more timely. And I'm only worried, Michael. Are you still there in audio form, or are you gone?
I am. I can hear you.
Okay.
Which is good. Now I can really relax.
That's
I
right.
can do whatever I want.
That pipe, that cigar is now lit.
Yeah.
Now, you know that I am at the University of California, San Diego. What you may not know is that our library is the Geisel Library. It is the library named after Theodore Seuss Geisel, and donated by him and his family many decades ago. And it contains within it many books, and some of those books are even his books. And recently, of course, you are undoubtedly aware that there was a move to cancel just 6 of his books, only 6. And I'm wondering, what is your take on that? What's the big deal? There's still 34 other ones, and we're not taking his name off the library or off the chancellor's house where he lives. So I'm wondering, what is what are the prospects for this? Is this kind of being overblown, or are we living through a digital Fahrenheit 451?
You're not taking the name off that library yet. I think that's how you have to qualify that. You're not taking it off yet. But it does seem to me that in the long run, all of these names are going to go if this ideology is permitted to go along. People have made this observation that you can't buy Dr. Seuss on Amazon now. You can't even buy Dr. Seuss on eBay now for those specific books that are no longer in publication. But you can buy Mein Kampf by Hitler, and that seems a little bit strange, isn't it? That maybe there's some drawing that some random person objects to in Dr. Seuss. I think there's a lot that you can object to in Mein Kampf, and yet that one's allowed. This is not an accident. It's not a mistake. The reason that the liberal establishment or the regime or the blob, or you just call it whatever you want to call it, the reason that they are going after Dr. Seuss is because Dr. Seuss is actually a greater threat to them than having Mein Kampf be for sale. Nobody but a handful of lunatics is reading Mein Kampf for lessons in how to go about politics.
Michael has disappeared just as he was talking about digital censorship. So I'll remind folks we are talking with Michael Knowles. He is experiencing some technical difficulties. If he only had a cheap Macintosh laptop like me, instead of a huge studio with cameras and camera technicians and sound engineers, presumably everything would be well with Michael. But this is kind of an ad hoc thing for him. He's sort of an amateur. He hasn't been doing this very long. So we will give him the benefit of our forbearance. And I'll ask people, to start thinking about potential questions you might want to ask on either YouTube or on the Clubhouse chat room. We'll have hand raising for folks that I know. I don't want to open it up to everybody, at least not yet. So if you do have questions or comments you'd like to make for Michael, hopefully we will get him back on the line. And until then, I will just ask you to check out some of the other videos that I've done in this past week on Dr. Brian Keating on YouTube and on Clubhouse. There's the tinkling sound. Let's see. Let's see here. Michael, you were just talking about digital censorship, and somehow it went all went dark. Are you there?
Right. I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes. And I can see you.
I I just gave you a about a 3-minute brilliant answer.
Yes.
I soliloquized.
Can
It
never be
was
repeated.
magnificent, and then I realized that you could not hear me at all. It can never be repeated
It could
again.
never be
But
repeated, yes.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly where I lost you, but
Yeah,
this
I was at, you had me at Mein Kampf. You were,
I had
which was the
you had
original
me on
title of
Mein
my
Kampf.
losing the Nobel Prize was Mein Kampf.
The issue with Mein Kampf and Dr. Seuss, people point out that it's kind of ironic that you can buy the Mein Kampf, but you can't buy Dr. Seuss. But not really. It's not. It serves the interests of the liberal establishment because they need Mein Kampf in order to call us all Nazis and call Donald Trump literally Hitler. Nobody but a few kooks on the fringes are reading Mein Kampf as a lesson. But Dr. Seuss, and more to the point, for instance, Abigail Shrier's book about transgenderism, or Ryan T. Anderson's hilariously titled book When Harry Became Sally. Those books that are really challenging the ideology of the dominant regime, those books do threaten them. And so they need to kick them off of Amazon. And sadly, all the right has been able to muster are these sort of limp, abstract defenses of free speech without being willing to make an substantive argument. It actually seems to me, in the spirit of bipartisanship, perhaps I can say this. I think the left understands free speech and censorship a lot better than the right does. And by that I mean that the left, like Herbert Marcuse, for instance, father of the New Left, he wrote this infamous essay called Repressive Tolerance, in which he says that you can't tolerate intolerance, and so we got to shut up the conservatives and we've got to promote left wing voices. People said this is outrageous, it's an inversion of free speech. Not necessarily. If you go back and read John Locke in the letter concerning toleration, he says we need to tolerate everybody except for atheists. We can't tolerate atheists. John Milton, writing Areopagitica, most famous defense of free speech in the English language, he says we need free speech for everybody except for Catholics. And in a way, I say this as a papist mackerel snapper myself. I understand why he said that, because at the time those religious wars were so threatening the English regime, you would have lost free speech and everything that went along with it. All speech regimes have some limitations on them. The American regime has always censored a broad swath of speech: fraud, fighting words, obscenity, until very recently at least, threats, sedition, all these sorts of things were censored. Now, we have a wonderfully broad free speech tradition in the United States, but there are limitations to it. And I think what the left saw is, okay, there's limitations, and we don't like limitations are, so we're just going to shift them in our favor. And I think if we really want to fight against that, it would behoove us not merely to defend these things in the abstract, but to go in and say, this is true, this is false, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. But that requires courage. And unfortunately, our conservative leaders have, generally speaking, have had the spines of jellyfish.
So those invertebrates, I think, I often find it, as I've had conversations with friends that are on the progressive side, and I always say, my show is not politically, it doesn't take political sides. We achieve neutrality by wild oscillations, politically speaking, which means that I'll have you on, and I'll have Noam Chomsky on, or I'll have Lawrence Tribe on, and I'll have Ben Shapiro
Right.
on. And that reason is because I don't really care to talk so much about politics, because I do believe, and you might condemn me for this, I believe we need a safe space, but a safe space in which you can have other ideas flourish that's safe from political overtones, even though I recognize most things have political overtones. But my example is nobody ever wakes up and says, I hate that Republican constellation over there, that stupid comet, that Democratic comet's going to ruin my all day. No, we don't do that. And
Right.
that's good. And that's why it does trouble me when scientists allow our work to become politicized, and when we step into the political arena. In my book Losing the Nobel Prize, I joke, every 4 years we get letters from 70 Nobel Prize winners on which of the Democrats should be the next president. And the fact that they've never endorsed any, and in retrospect, I had some colleagues defriend me when Bush was in office, or unfriend me or whatever, because I won this presidential early career award for scientist engineers, and they said, how could you accept it from that war criminal and monger, blah blah blah, and then just 8 short years later, or 6 short years later, when Trump was in office. It was, why couldn't we just have that nice George Bush back back in town? But my point was, who cares, as long as they are supportive of the scientific endeavor, which can be jeopardized if we become too political. So my admonitions are as much for my fellow scientists as they are for their own self-interest, in other words, for the benefit of science, as they are for me to want to maintain science as a politically neutral endeavor, which I don't think it is so much anymore.
Right. Well, but part of that gets back to this radical subjectivism that is a political problem that really overtook our politics. You probably saw the Smithsonian sent out a handout the other, maybe a few months ago, which said that we need to stop using terms like objectivity and hard work, because those are terms that promote white supremacy. And you say, well, that seems a little offensive to me. I don't know. I talk about the soft bigotry of low expectations, but it's a real problem, because if it actually gets to this issue of kind of politically correct language and free speech, the only way that we can speak to one another is if there is an objective reality to which our words refer. So if words have meaning, and we can, generally speaking, understand what the words mean, then we can communicate, even if we have different ideas about things. But if there is no objective reality to which the words refer, if it's just, to quote Hamlet when he's feigning madness, words, 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 or if, to quote Derrida, there is no outside of the text, there's no, it's just all so subjective, then it's really, our political discourse, and certainly our scientific discourse, uh, ceases to be about the disinterested pursuit of truth as we can see it and as we try to find it, and it becomes rather a battle of interests. We cease to be able to speak to one another. Communication is not possible at that point. We just become sort of grunting animals, beating one another over the head with a club, and it's why politics gets so ugly, and it's why the scientific endeavor becomes impossible at that point.
Right. And I also think, when we do kind of dip our toes into that regime of, let's see, Michael, are you still there? All right, we have lost Michael yet again. But that's okay. He is tinkling back in. There he is. Michael, are you there again?
Did you just accuse me of tinkling?
You were tinkling in. I love it. By the way, how's the experience? Now you are an experimental cosmologist, because presumably you are dealing with an awful lot of dark matter produced by your young son. How is it going?
This is very true. Thankfully, my wife has been taking the brunt of it, but it's really, really pretty shocking how all of that works. The other thing that I did not expect about having a kid, you talk about science. I expected intellectually to like having a kid, but I don't know. I'm not the most touchy-feely guy in the world.
Really?
I don't.
No.
You'd be shocked to
You.
hear. I don't exactly know how to talk to kids or babies. I figured I'd
No.
I'd hand them a cigar and a scotch or something and say, "All right, buddy, what do you think of the Yankees?" But I knew I'd like it intellectually. And
Yeah.
then that kid comes out, and you look, and the emotional rush is so intense. I'm such a terrible husband. I had been furiously trying to finish my book that was
Yeah.
due on the same day as my baby, and
Right.
my son unfortunately chose to come right on time. He didn't even give me a day window. So I'm in the delivery room furiously typing. And then my son comes out, and I look at him and I realize, oh, my book doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
It's so minor compared to
It
what is
is.
now in the world.
And speaking of books, when I had our first child, I was in a state of excited delirium. And as I'm, in the middle of the night, getting awoken for, the third or fourth time that night, I just said, "Get me the instruction manual." I like, but there is no instruction manual, and I don't think that it can really. There's no experience that can prepare you for it, right? Everyone's saying, yeah, you can get work done before the baby comes, but they say, oh, catch up on your sleep. Like, I can store up food pretty well. I can store up food with the best, as you know, as an expert scientist, experts say have 6 months of food on hand in case of emergency. So I keep it on my body at all times.
That's
Um,
very wise. It's very prudent of you.
but it does. Babies do come with a bounty of cigars. But yes, kids are really. I say like you could marry as I did. Perhaps I don't know. I've never seen your wife or met your wife, but I might have married my wife for less than pure motives. She's so beautiful. But there's no such, and so it's selfish, right? Intrinsically, there could be a selfish component, even though you won't remain married very long if you have a selfish reason for marrying your wife or your husband or your partner or whatever. But there's nothing selfish about having a kid. There's nothing like, oh, this kid is giving me so much great, especially for the first. My father used to say, I love kids after they learn algebra, and they really don't do much. So as Aristotle said, we love our children because we sacrifice for them, and you love that which you sacrifice for. And it's made me, much more, kind of attuned to things that I never was as not only as a single man, but even as a married man with no children. It really has
Well,
an irreversible effect for the good.
of course, because as you, I think, rightly infer, and as you say from your own experience, sometimes when you see a lovely little lass at a bar and you decide to saddle on up to her and buy a drink, maybe you have pure motives of love, but maybe you have your own interest in mind too. But true love is willing the good of another. And with your kid, the kid is most of the things that my son is giving me right now are bodily fluids.
Yeah,
Most of the things are not really what we want to see it to in the morning.
that's right.
But the minute you see the kid, you just think, oh, I would jump in front of a bus if I had to stop this kid from crying. One, because it would be for his good, and two, because I can't take the crying anymore. So maybe
Yeah,
I jump in front of the bus anyway. But that really does put priorities in order. And the other thing that it does is it made me realize that women having children is like the center of the universe,
yeah.
and we all get sort of wrapped up in our careers and everything, and that's
Oh yeah.
great. But it doesn't even come close. There's nothing even that can approximate it.
Yeah, there really isn't. And, there's a flip side of that too, is that, kids always love their mothers more than their fathers,
Yeah.
no matter what we do. And that's natural. And I even feel like they love their maternal grandmother more than their paternal grandmother. But that's because they were actually inside of their maternal grandmother by virtue of the egg that the daughter
That's right.
had when she was born. So it kind of all makes sense to me. I want to turn to human life and the value of human life is being debated. There was an article, I sent it to our mutual friend Ben Shapiro, and he just kind of rolled his eyes over the internet lines that connected us. And it was this article by a professor. I won't give his name or his institution because I really feel like he's beclowned himself. The article was humans are basically squirrels. Get over it. And the whole argument, it actually started with Aristotle and Aristotle's statement of, that mankind is animus politicus or something like that, that we are just
Mhm.
political animals that can socialize. But other than that, we have no superiority over the squirrels. And actually, that same day on Sunday, this a couple of weeks ago on the Sunday Times, yes, I get this. I get the New York Times and I get the Daily Wire. I don't know too many people who have had on, Michael Knowles and Noam Chomsky on the same show, and I don't know too
You
many
are
people
the
who
one person.
subscribe to both. The Daily Wire and the New York Times. But be that as it may, that same day I was walking on the beach with my brother and one of my kids, and I saw a hawk swoop down and just eviscerate a squirrel. And I said, I'm not quite a squirrel, and it just made me think when people really promote or demote the human being or promote the animals to this level, and they use science as a justification for that. I think we're living in scarier times than we realize, and that was just as I was becoming kind of rekindling an interest in philosophy. Physicists are notorious for kind of looking down on philosophers, and I had kind of gotten over that as I got more interested in discussing things like the nature of free will and artificial intelligence, which I'll turn to next. But what do you make of this resurgence of humans are animals? Mother Nature is God, and we are just playing in this sandbox of determined particles that have no free will.
Well, it's very shallow, obviously. I always loved the analytic philosopher Alvin Plantinga's observation when he said of Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and those guys. He said, the new atheists are far inferior to the old atheists. The old atheists made slightly better arguments. This fellow who wrote about the squirrels in the New York Times, he quotes Aristotle correctly, but I don't think he really gives him a fair shake. The power of speech, which makes us a political animal, is a pretty important one. Noam Chomsky would have quite a lot to say about that, actually.
That's
The
right.
fact that human beings are conscious rather, and that we have will and intellect is quite a distinction between us and the squirrels. And what's incoherent also about the kind of faddish new materialism that we're getting from the left is that they contradict themselves immediately. So on one hand, we're really just meat puppets. Free will is an illusion, and we live in a fatalist, deterministic society, and all of our hopes and dreams and loves and desires are just illusions because of random chemicals going off in the brain, and better to just follow your own appetites until you glut yourself and die. That's one thing that we're told. And then on the other hand, we're told that our physical selves actually have nothing to do with our actual identities.
Right.
We're told that, I look like a man, I hope, but actually, if I feel on some metaphysical level that I am a woman, then actually, it's not even that my identity is complicated. I actually just am a woman, and my organs and my DNA and my physique have absolutely nothing to do with that. So on the one hand, they fall into this materialist heresy, but then on the other hand, they fall into this, what you might call Gnostic dualism, this heresy that says that we're not physical at all, we're just souls. And really, I think these people should go back and read their Aristotle a little more closely, because the reality that we all know intuitively about the human condition is that we are bodies and souls. We're hylomorphic beings, and you can't really separate one from the other one. And this is why it's often said that science is the handmaiden of philosophy. And you might say philosophy is the handmaiden of theology. And it's just, the thing that's sad to me is it's not the ignorance. As Ronald Reagan famously said, the problem with our opponents is not that they're ignorant. It's not that they don't know things, it's that they know so many things that aren't so.
Mm-hmm.
If they just went back and read like even one philosophical text from the Middle Ages, they would unlearn all of their very foolish ideas that they think that they're inventing the wheel all over again, but they really don't need to do that. And their science would make a whole lot more sense if they would take their philosophy seriously, as you have done, and it's why you speak of it so well.
Yeah, and to me, I see a resurgence of this in many forms, and now Michael has departed, but hopefully only temporarily so. We'll get him back on the line when the tinkling resumes. Or on Clubhouse with Michael Knowles. Michael is tinkling in. There he is. Let's add him to the right. There you go. Hello. Blink
Tink-
2 times. There you go. Got
I've
him.
totally tinkled.
So I've been pointing out, kind of as a tweak, as a provocation to my fellow scientists, that there are none so religious as scientists in many ways. In fact, we even have a religion that I call Nobelism, which actually has a founding father, Alfred Nobel. It has its holidays, the ceremony of Annunciation and the coronation of laureates that takes place not on Alfred Nobel's birthday, but on his death day, macabrely so. And it not only has its patron saints, the laureates who win Nobel Prizes, no fault of their own. You actually can't nominate yourself for a Nobel Prize. Trust me, I tried. But you also have the apostates, the decriers of it, that rail against the priesthood, which is the Swedish Academy of Sciences. And we actually have our share of golden graven medallions that feature a picture of Alfred Nobel that you must bow down to receive. And I think it's so funny that scientists, even today, I just saw one from a scientist by the name of Michio Kaku. Have you ever heard of him?
I can't say that I have. I don't
Okay.
follow him on Twitter.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Maybe you should. He does quite prolific tweets therein. But he might not be on Clubhouse. Maybe I'll get him on Clubhouse. But anyway, the tweet was something like, if you want to win a Nobel Prize and do something Einstein, i.e., another patron saint, was unable to do, just come up with the God equation, the equation that explains all of matter and the theory of everything.
Oh
And
my
here it
goodness.
is. This appeal to authority by someone who's presumably secular. I've heard him talk about it before, but certainly there are other people, very secular. Lawrence Krauss is a very prominent new militant, self-declared militant atheist. and yet they'll invoke these things to the same effect that I hope for our next book, in all seriousness, Mike, we'll talk about Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, which is perhaps the most famous of all popular science books, which was written from a deeply atheistic perspective, wanting to prove the invalidity and innecessity or lack of necessity of God. And in fact, the whole book is about the invalidation of Hawking's belief that the only role of God at the time was to start the universe off, to create time, in other words. And in his book, he comes up with a new theory of time, which he assumes is true, and no physicist ever really took it seriously, and nor do they now. And he says that the only role of a God would be to instantiate time, and we don't need that because here's my theory, the Hawking-Hartle theory, that time comes out of naturally emerging. And so we don't need God. And in fact, the end of his book ends with, if we can get even more evidence that I'm right, then we will truly know the mind of God. What is it about these scientists who are admittedly atheists, not only secular, but atheists, and their need to appeal to God so often?
Well, of course they need to do that because man is fundamentally a religious being, and no amount of, as C.S. Lewis said, you can scribble darkness on the walls of your padded cell, but it's not going to block out the sun. And so they have this natural longing. But it's really sad when you see people who are so intelligent, like many of these scientists, who just don't know a damn thing
Mm-hmm.
about philosophy or theology. And I've tried reading some of their books on the topic. I haven't tried reading many of their books on their actual areas of expertise, but I have tried reading some of their books on pop religion, and it's embarrassing. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
sort of thing that if they were
Sophistic.
freshmen in college, would not be accepted
Yeah,
by
I was going to say
theologians.
sophomoric, but yeah, I'll
It
take
is. It
freshman.
is. It is. It's not even sophomoric, And if you actually study this question, you can find at least a dozen good arguments for the existence of God, which can be known through human reason from the natural world, and knowledge of whom is obviously expanded greatly by revelation, but whose existence can be known from the natural world. I can't think of a single good argument against the existence of God. And you can hear these sort of various, I don't know, materialist feelings or impulses, but we've discussed some of them earlier. They're just very silly. And the one argument against God, I guess, that really does convince people because it's so visceral is the problem of pain, the problem
Yeah,
of suffering in the
the
world,
Odyssey. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and theodicy is what it's called. And but really, I think if you think about it a little more closely, theodicy becomes actually an argument for God. So even that doesn't really work. But I would just encourage them to open up their Thomas Aquinas, if for no other reason than to not embarrass themselves when they
Mm-hmm.
venture into waters that they just really have not
What's
explored in the
what's
least.
yeah, what's so funny to me is that Lawrence Krauss, and I consider him an influence. I personally like him. He came up with this book, A Universe from Nothing, which Richard Dawkins called tantamount to Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, and no physicist takes that particular claim seriously. But just the level of comparison, because I do think that humans have a need not only to be political but to be religious. And when you think about a religion that's kosher, so to speak, I look at it again in thinking about this week. So, as you know from your connections to certain Jewish individuals, that Jews read the Old Testament once per year, which means it's divided into 52 portions, and we read one per week. And then this particular one has to do with the golden calf. This Shabbos is this tomorrow's portion read in synagogues around the world has to do with the worship of the golden calf. And I always point out, one of the objections famously kind of pithily summarized by Woody Allen, he said, I really want to have belief in God, but there's no proof, there's no evidence. So I would settle even for a divine sneeze. A divine sneeze. And I always point out, like, no, you wouldn't. Like first of all, I think Jews are rumored to be somewhat smart. I mean, maybe my company excluded, but we make up something like 20 or 30% of the Nobel Prize winners. And I'm only saying that because other people use that as attribution to our intelligence. I don't know of a single physicist Nobel Prize winner who's been religiously practicing, and
Right.
that's my counterexample to folks who do bring that statistic up. But anyway, when I think about someone like Lawrence Krauss, who was Jewish, or born Jewish, and they graduate from Judaism at age 13. In other words, they have their bar mitzvah, and that's it. That's the end of their Judaism, if they even have it. Now, I actually was an altar boy in the Catholic Church when I should have been having my bar mitzvah, but that's another story.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, but from the perspective of like we need something to worship, and here are these Jews back in they just witnessed 10 miraculous undertakings by the divine creator. They heard God, according to the story, right? And then just 40 days later, when Moses tarries for a little bit, he's late to a meeting, and who hasn't been there, Michael? I mean, he had his Skype thing crashing back then, but he was late by like a few hours, and all of a sudden they start making a golden calf.
Right.
And
Right.
and how much has human nature really changed in 3,000 years? I would say not much. So would it be a proof? I mean, people that say, show me proof, and then I'll believe. And there are people even from, Elie Wiesel and others that I have a great deal of respect for that basically have the most simplistic. My favorite one is this Professor Avi Loeb, who is Israeli but secular. He wrote a book called Extraterrestrial about this object that he claims came from an extraterrestrial intelligence, and he's quite secular. And he says, no, if God really wanted to have Abraham not kill Isaac or attempt to sacrifice, he should have just like had a voice recorder invented back 3,000 years. And I'm just like, you're a brilliant guy. Like, and the Torah, the Old Testament better than I do, probably by virtue of where you grew up. And yet you're saying something so simplistic. It's just against human nature. We have a desire, I think, more than to believe, to reject belief. And I wonder, why is that? Why are so many people that are intelligent, why do they want to reject, something, even just religious practice, even just being what I call myself sometimes a devout agnostic? In other words, practice some form of religion because you're going to do it in one way or another, and do the good deeds that religion impels us to do. Why is there so much hostility towards that among our fellow scientists?
Well, you'll be shocked to find out that the cause of this is the fall of man, which is talked about in that simplistic little book that so many scientists might take issue with. Pride is the cause of the fall.
Mm.
And Whittaker Chambers, actually, in the political realm, writes about this in his excellent book, Witness. Whittaker Chambers, very famous ex-communist,
Mm.
and he converted and became a Christian. And he described communism not as the absence of faith. He says that communism, and I think we may say more broadly, kind of secular leftism, the kind of dominant ideas that we have in our country now, he says it's the second oldest faith. It is the great alternative faith for mankind, and it began not when Marx wrote in the 19th century, but it began in the Garden of Eden when the
Mm.
serpent said to Eve, "Ye shall be as gods." And so pride causes the fall, and people who are very intelligent often come to look like fools. This is also something that's observed in that little book that probably some of the scientists haven't read, which is that the wise are made to look as fools because they are so intelligent and they are so hot on their own supply that they can't recognize their own finitude, their own mortality, their own limits of their intellect. This is a distinction that I loved so much. I think it's the most important speech given in the 21st century. It was given by Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. It's called the Regensburg Lecture. He gave it at the University of Regensburg, I think in 2006, I want to say. And in it, he got in trouble. He was told this was politically incorrect. They thought he was being mean to Muslims, but he actually wasn't. He was quoting a medieval Muslim scholar uh, uh, and describing the difference between Christianity and Islam. Because in Christianity, God, the second person of the Blessed Trinity, in Jesus, is identified with the Logos, the divine logic of the universe.
Mhm.
So God, according to Christianity, is logic. According to Islam, Allah is utterly transcendent. So God is pure will. If Allah, according to this scholar who he was quoting, Ibn Hazm, if Allah so willed it, he could make his people worship idols, and there would be no problem with that. Whereas the God of Christianity would not do that sort of thing, to invoke the golden calf. This is where we get our civilization from, the idea that reason and faith are not in opposition to one another, but actually go together, much like free will and grace go together. Dancing is as if to be dancing a waltz together. You're not quite sure exactly how it works, but it really does go together. That is what is now being so undermined by people who are full of pride, as we've discussed, but who also, for intelligent chaps, just don't know anything about what they're talking about. And to watch these sort of intellectual, spiritual, and cultural destruction all around us, you just want to scream and say, guys, you're smart. Stop doing this. You're destroying the very culture we all cherish.
Very good. So I know we only have a couple minutes left. So those of you on Clubhouse who are known to be known by Michael or myself, if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand and I will take those. Otherwise, I can open it up more broadly to everybody. If you do have a quick question for Michael or for myself. The last thing I want to ask you about is familiarity, perhaps, with this notion that artificial intelligence is going to be increasing at an exponential rate, continuing to increase at an exponential rate. We've all seen images, videos of dogs, robotic dogs dancing, the Macarena, and all sorts of other fun things, which I, terrify me, but also titillate me. And there's a notion that we're going to have this augmented, capacity thanks to computing power and technology. First of all, I don't believe that we need more intelligence. I don't believe we need artificial intelligence. I'm more interested in artificial wisdom, but that's a
Right.
subject for another day. But I wonder, what do you subscribe the so-called simulation hypothesis, that eventually will get to be so powerful, computers could get to be so powerful, just according to Moore's law, that we'll have enough computing power to simulate any event in the past history of the universe that's coarse-grained enough for human beings to interact with in a classical level. So what do you make of that simulation hypothesis? That's something that you've thought about?
Well, Brian, my multi-million dollar production studio that I'm sitting in right now
Yes.
cannot get a simple Skype call to work. So I'm not so worried about Terminator at the very moment. But there's no question, of course, technology is going to progress. I
Yes.
think, though, a lot of these techno-futurist types fall into the same foolish error that we've been discussing among scientists, which is they don't recognize that man is fallen and these things tend not to work out as the great prophets of them, or as the sort of dim, shallow prophets of them think that they will.
Hmm.
I guess my friend Father George Rutler has this line. He says that the difference between a Scottish optimist and a Scottish pessimist is a Scottish pessimist says things can't get any worse, and a Scottish optimist says, "Oh yes, they can." And I suppose this is a little bit of my take here. Is the reason I don't fear so much the kind of simulation, this perfection of AI where we don't know what reality is I think it's just going to get a lot worse. And I think the
Hmm.
fallenness of man is going to corrupt that progress.
Right.
And as technology does get more powerful, is going to create probably just lots of problems along the way for us.
Okay, we got time for one question, maybe two, from Norman and from Gideon. So you are on with Michael Knowles. Michael, on your phone, unmute yourself, and
Okay.
you can talk on Clubhouse, and I will try to make this work out.
All right. Let's see.
Gideon, go ahead.
All right. Well, I guess my question is kind of on that same theme with the simulation theory, because my understanding of it is that typically uh, the people who believe this sort of thing think we're already in the simulation, and so they kind of start having this weird quasi, almost godlike belief that like coincidences are evidence of the simulation acting again. And I was wanting to get Michael's take on what is behind that particular heresy that the Joe Rogan and the Sam Adams, not Sam Adams, what's his name?
Sam Harris,
Scott
probably.
Adams.
Or
Those
Scott.
guys
Okay.
tend to fall into relatively easily.
Sure, gladly. My thought on that is that all nature is but art unknown to thee, and all chance direction which thou canst not see, as Alexander Pope once said. And actually, coincidentally, because I was just quoting my friend Father George Rutler, on a book where he used that quote, he had a line that he wrote himself, and he said, "An evil generation looks for signs and wonders, but a stupid generation ignores signs and wonders." And what I think these people who pretend that we're living in a simulation believe is They want to avoid the reality of providence, that there are these coincidences that actually do often tell us certain things. The traditional, certainly the Catholic view of the world, but I think more broadly a religious view of the world, is very semiotic. It's rich in symbols because we know that the physical things have metaphysical meaning. They refer to things that are formal and are outside of this finite creation. And so what I strongly suspect is people have the eerie, uncanny, maybe numinous feeling that there is some meaning in the world. We're not just a bunch of meat puppets, but they don't want to face the reality of what that means for their behavior and ultimately what it means for the reality of judgment and what comes next.
Very good. So we had one more question. Michael, you got another minute?
30 I do have another minute.
Okay, good. Norman, you are up to bat. I will ask you to unmute yourself, and you're talking with Michael J. Knowles. Oh, that was Mike. That was Norman. Okay, sorry, Gideon. I screwed up. Put you back in the audience. You get timeout. You get Scottish punishment. Let's see. Gideon, you still have your hand up, so let's get you back up there. Sorry. Gideon is now up. Gideon, please ask your question for Michael.
Great, man. You have excellent taste, Gideon. I can already tell.
The left have now decided to cancel Dr. Seuss, even though he was an FDR Democrat, supported the internment of Japanese Americans, and all these things, and suddenly he's racist now, even though they don't even realize that. And then they say that FDR is like the best president ever, or whatever. So are they just like confused? I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah, can you repeat the question, Michael, just for those that didn't hear?
Oh yes, gladly. Am I still muted, or can
No. I'm getting feedback on my side, but you can just repeat the question about FDR.
Yes. So the question was, why are they going after Dr. Seuss? Dr. Seuss was a liberal Democrat. I frankly don't even really like Dr. Seuss.
Oh, Michael, sorry. Unmute your Clubhouse microphone.
Oh, I've got to unmute my Clubhouse.
Yeah.
See, this is why the machines are not going to take over. This is why, because I'm not too worried.
Wait till your son. Yeah,
there you go. Hear me?
Yep. Go for it.
Okay, excellent. So the question was, why is the left canceling Dr. Seuss? Dr. Seuss was a liberal Democrat. Ann Coulter actually tweeted out today. She said, "Don't cancel him over his books about Mulberry Street. Cancel him over his books that were making light of the Soviet Union in the 1980s. That's the real problem." So the reason they're doing it, I think, is not to refer to a cliche here or invoke a cliche, but we can learn something from 1984. And I know that conservatives are never supposed to invoke George Orwell because he was a democratic socialist and conservatives don't understand his book. Well, first of all, the socialism of George Orwell was quite complicated, and I write about it in my upcoming book, Speechless. But more than that, I think the comparison is apt because Orwell says in 1984 that the regime, the Big Brother regime, relies primarily on newspeak, changing the language, and on all these memory holding different historical figures, like, for instance, Dr. Seuss, but also on doublethink. Doublethink, I think, is the key here, which is if the regime can force you to hold contradictory ideas at the same time, they will have succeeded in cracking your humanity because they've cracked your power of higher reason, and you will be unwilling and unable to articulate the truth. So they'll say FDR is the greatest president ever, FDR who interned Japanese Americans. But Dr. Seuss, who, I don't know, he drew a caricature that frankly is not offensive. I don't know. Most of these characters he drew are not particularly offensive. I guess some of them are. He has to be castigated and cast into outer darkness where there's wailing and gnashing of teeth. The reason that they do this is because of the contradiction. The fact that we are now told that we have to be feminists and believe all women, but also we have to recognize that women don't exist and men can be women and women can be men. The idea that we need to, this is actually, this particular gender example is clearer when you consider the arguments for greater acceptance of homosexuals. They will say, well, it's because you're born this way, and if a man is born this way, then he's attracted to men, and therefore it would be wrong to tell him to not pursue those desires, and so love wins, right? But then the argument for transgenderism is that men and women are not really fixed categories, and you can just, if you have some surgeries, or if you actually just change your mind, you can become a member of the opposite sex. Those are contradictory ideas. Andrew Sullivan, gay conservative, wrote an excellent essay on this a few years ago. But the contradiction is not going to undo the regime. the regime is aiming at undoing our recognition of the faculties of higher reason. And so I think they're going to keep it up, and they're going to tear down certain statues that don't make any sense, and they're going to put up other statues. But ultimately, they're tearing the whole edifice down, because we were discussing this a little bit earlier. If we can't have any reasonable conversation, then, which I think is the end of this whole project, then ultimately we're just going to be grunting warlords, beating one another over the head and pursuing our interests and our baser appetites. And I hate to leave us on a low note there, but when we invoke things like the science of history, you always hear this from the left. They say, well, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice, or you're on the wrong side of history, or something like that. They're going back to a longstanding concept on the left, which is that leftist political scientists have discovered the science of history. They know how it's going to go, and it's kind of a deterministic thing. Well, Christians certainly have a sense of that too. I think Jews do as well, a sort of eschatology, the idea that the world is going to end. It's going to follow a course. We think it's going to follow a different course, I think, than our radical wing friends think it will. But surely that is a disagreement, and we all know things are going to get worse. But in the meantime, if we can try to preserve something of our culture and preserve something of a reasonable society and be able to communicate with one another, we might have some ages of darkness, but perhaps there will be light that will come up again.
Very good. Well, Michael Knowles, author of the Reasons to Vote for Democrats, a comprehensive guide, and the forthcoming Speechless, of which he is not usually found in such a quantum mechanical state. Mike, I want to thank you for your courage, and maybe you'll come back again because there's a whole list of questions that I demand answers to of all my guests, including what's your prediction on Bitcoin? Including some topics about the pressure of fame and sort of the achievements that you've really unlocked at such a young age. And I think of you as a very courageous person. Obviously, we don't always agree on stuff, and that's okay. And that's the purpose of intellectuals, is that we can debate and we can have comedy with some comedy. And I just love I love what you do. I'm a huge fan. I'm so delighted that we got a chance to work together. The PragerU Book Club episode is called The Dialogue with Michael Knowles. You can find that on PragerU or on YouTube, and you can find us riffing off of one another. And I hope to have you back again. Michael, thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and kiss that cute little baby for me.
I appreciate growing it, pal. Thank you for having me. I look forward to having you on my show and then chatting again soon. By the way, in answer to your Bitcoin question, going to the moon. And coincidentally, I have a little piece of the moon also thanks to you.
That is right.
Thank you for that.
That is right.
We'll talk soon.
I gave you a book. You gave me a book, and I gave you a piece of the moon. All right, my brother. Have a great weekend. We'll talk again soon. Bye, everybody.
All right, you too.